Wonderful, warm welcome to the world. My name is Joel. Today we are going to learn about nested loops in C++. Now I wrote notes about nested loops. If someone wanted to write it or read it, please pause it and check it. Okay, so what does a nested loop mean? A nested loop is the concept of placing a loop inside another loop. Nested loops are fundamental in programming because they allow you to handle complex tasks involving repetitive operations or multi-level data structure. Okay, now I'm going to see how to declare a nested for loop. Now our example for declaring a nested for loop is to print 10 into 10 grid of stars. So I'm first gonna write a for loop, and inside the for loop I'm going to declare a variable called k equals 0, and you can give this whatever the name you prefer or what, but I'm going to keep this k and I'm going to write k lesser 10, so it will print till 9. So basically from 0 to 9 is 10, and I'm going to write k plus plus, or more I'm going to write plus plus k. And in curly braces I'm going to write actually here a comment so people can understand what is this purpose for. Outer loop for row, and inside this I'm going to create another for loop, and I want to give this int and give this the name j equals 0, j lesser 10 semicolon, and plus plus j. Now the reason why I am giving plus plus j is because I want this to first increment after checking the value. Again I am going to make curly braces, and I'm going to write what this purpose is for. Inner loop for columns, and then I'm going to write cout, and in double quotes I'm going to write star and give space and a semicolon, and down at the close brace I'm going to write cout endl to print a new line. And not only endl, you can write new line, but I'm going to write endl. Now the first loop is printing for rows, the second loop is printing for columns. Why I wrote cout star is because then both the loops are gonna print stars, and cout endl means after 10 it's again going to go to the next line and print 10 stars. Let me show you. Let me run it. There we go, 10 rows and 10 columns. And not only stars, you can change this to somewhat like whatever you want, like hash, and like literally whatever you want, but I'm going to keep this for a star. So these are nested for loops. And now you want to see nested while loops. So our example for nested while loop is to print a 10 into 11 rectangle of stars. So on top of my comment, I'm gonna write two variables called int rows. I'm gonna set this equal to 10, and I'm gonna write int calls for columns equal 11. And I want to actually show you something. I can just write both rows and columns on the same line by keeping a comma and writing calls for columns. I equal 11. And with that, in one line I can declare two variables. And down of my comment, I'm gonna write a while, declare a variable called int, and I'm gonna write int I. I'm gonna set this to the value 0. And I'm gonna write while, and in braces I'm gonna write while I lesser rows and in curly braces I'm going to declare a variable called j, and I write in j equals 0, and again I'm going to write one more while loop inside the while loop, and I'm going to write j less calls. And if you set this I and j value to 1, then write lesser equal to, so it will print the 10 into 11, but I set this to 0, so I don't need to write lesser equal to. And again in curly braces I'm going to write cout, and in double quotes I'm going to write star gap semicolon, and I'm going to write j plus plus semicolon, and I'm going to write down here after close curly brace cout and L semicolon, and I'm going to write I plus plus semicolon. So what's happening here is, first I declared two variables called rows, 10 and columns, and matter of fact, if you change the values, the rows and columns also get changed. And the while loop, since my value equals 0, I wrote I lesser rows, which means 0 to 9 is 10 numbers. So it will print 10 rows, and int j equals 0, and while j lesser calls, so 0 to 10, 11 numbers, and cout star, which means everything will get printed star. And you can change it, as I said before, you can change it to hash or the $sign or whatever you want. And j plus plus is where it prints the columns. And after 11 numbers, after like 11 stars, you have to go down. So I write cout and L, so it will go down. I plus plus is where the rows get printed. And let me show you. Let me click it, and it's gonna print like a rectangle, the rows and columns. And now I'm gonna see nested do while loops. So our example for nested do while loop is to print triangle of stars. So on top of, so I'll take off these rows and columns. It's no need here. I'm going to keep the int and take off the remaining and write int n equals, and this is for the rows. Like if I keep 8 rows and a semicolon, and I'm going to give this a comment for rows, and down of the comment I'm going to write int I equals 1 semicolon, and I'm going to write do in curly braces. I'm going to write int j equals 1 semicolon, and I'm going to insert this. I'm going to create another do while loop, do, and I'm going to write cout, and I'm going to write star gap semicolon, and I'm going to write j plus plus and semicolon, and I'm going to write beside the curly brace, close curly brace, I'm going to write while j lesser equal I and a semicolon. I'm going to write cout and L, and I'm going to write I plus plus semicolon, and beside it I'm going to write while and in braces I'm going to write I lesser equal n. So let me explain you the code. So I declared a variable called n, and that's for rows, which means if I set this the value to more higher like 10, then 10 rows will be printed out. Int I and int j are for the stops to ends, and they also print in star ways. And j lesser equal I, which means this j is equal to I, and I lesser equal n for rows. So let's run it. One sec, here's one semicolon. Let's run it. There we go. And each time I change the number of rows, like to 11 or even higher, it prints those many rows of triangle. So those are nested loops in C++. I hope you found the video helpful, useful. Please like, subscribe, and bye bye. Take care.